but the point is just always just love whatever you're doing. Whatever you're doing, a day will never be boring, and then you'll always find new opportunities, because who doesn't want people with passion on their team? So you can always learn more, but the passion, you tap into that, you'll always be successful.
Hey nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing professionals and ask them all about how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're highlighting skills that data professionals use on a daily basis. Plus, we always include some fun bits because we're all nerds here and we love to have fun. So thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And as always, folks, happy learning. Today with us, we have Alex Merced. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Monica. I really look forward to having a fun conversation, and plus the fun bits.
Absolutely. So glad to have you here. We're going to have such a fun time.
Yes.
We typically start off our show by understanding people's origin stories. So if you could please tell us about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Got it. Okay, so everyone listening, time to buckle up, because this is going to be a ride. Okay, so my backstory. I'm going to start from the beginning. So there was a big bang. No, just kidding, not that far. But what happened was, I grew up, and my interest in technology kind of started with first video games. I started playing video games. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a video game developer. Then there was a time where my mom, I think the one time she ever had to ground me or punish me or something like that, I think I got like a C or something on something. So she took away my video games for like 6 months, but I got to use the computer. So this is where I started using the internet and learning about web development. Also, I would also get to play with this is back in the day of GeoCities. So I was sitting there using what you see is what you get editor on GeoCities. She was actually, I think, going to school part-time at the time. So when she'd ever go to college, because she was a single mother, she would actually leave me and my brother in the computer lab, and we would just kind of play around with the computer and all that stuff. So I would actually teach myself HTML and learn that. And then so I started kind of getting interested in sort of making things. And then I learned about this thing called RPG Maker, which is this software for making role-playing games. And I started using that, and that starts teaching me about conditional statements and logical flows of games and stuff like that. So that kind of starts giving me sort of that mindset for technology and development. And I do end up going to a special high school called in Connecticut. They have these regional vocational technical schools where it's half high school, half a technical school. So I would be doing my high school stuff, and I'd be doing microcomputers, so learning C++, all the Microsoft Office products. So I did that in high school, and then I did eventually go to college for computer science. But I ended up at that point, I learned how to play guitar. And my mindset was kind of a different place. I was going to be a rock star. If anyone looks up Alex Merced guitar on YouTube, you'll find plenty of videos of me playing guitar and singing. So have fun with that.
That's so
cool. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go be a rock star. So I changed into a communications degree, and then to a cultural studies degree. I graduate, and then I randomly end up in finance. So I end up training people in finance, and this is where I start learning how to really develop my communication chops and how to take really complex ideas, break them down. I mean, there was another little foray into owning a hobby gaming store. That's kind of a side story, but you can come back to that later. But basically, in that endeavor and in finance, I'm learning how to teach people. So I do that for 10 years, and then I decide I miss doing technology. I dabbled in it, with with crypto, Python, stuff like that in the meantime. But I'm okay, I'm ready to go back in. So I go, I think it's 2018, 2019, I decided to just do this real deep dive. And then one thing I always do is I always try to build a brand for myself. I always find a good way for me to encourage myself to learn faster, and also to help me make a splash in any new space is I create content. I'll create YouTube, blogs, whatnot. So that way I establish that brand right away. So as soon as I decided to get into technology, I started my Alex Merced Coder YouTube channel, where I'm creating tutorials on JavaScript, Python, Go, Rust, etc. And I do that for several years. I'm working as a web developer during this time, and also working for General Assembly Bootcamp, training web developers at that point. And eventually I get to a point where I'm kind of in a good groove and everything's going really well, but I'm like, I really just like educating. Like I really like educating and I really like tech. I wish I could dedicate more time to that. And I discovered like there's this role, developer advocacy, where basically it's just that. It's like it's a really nice cross section of my favorite things: marketing, tech, and well, branding, tech, and education. So I pursue that role, and due to sort of like my experience at that point with creating content and breaking down technical ideas, I was a pretty good fit for a lot of those positions. So I found a home at Dremio, and in Dremio I was able to kind of really kind of get deeper into the data space. Like I was already kind of exposed to the data space. I had built like a small application for reading like genetic data files to help basically people understand whether they have certain genetic variants or not. So I had to work with a lot with like different databases and trying to like partition a database to get it to read that data quick enough there. So I had done a little bit of that in practice. But here I kind of really kind of explored the big data space and really got to see like, okay, the world of data lakes and data warehouses and all these kind of tools when you're talking about petabyte scale. And this has sort of been the space that I've existed in, particularly talking about Apache Iceberg the last 2 years. And then that's sort of uh, the TLDR version of the story.
That's really awesome. So it sounds like you were able to kind of like mix all of your skills and interests together with this developer advocacy position.
Very much so. I definitely feel at this point in my life like all the previous experiences in my life that seemed like they didn't make sense or were random make sense now. Like it was all leading up to this point. Like this is why it all happened.
That's awesome. What made you gravitate towards the Dremio company besides their awesome mascot?
The mascot was actually part of it. I really liked the mascot. Like at the time, like I mentioned, like it was my particular experience was a pretty good fit for this role. So I did have a few offers on the table. But as I liked it, one, I was really interested in sort of the space. Like the more I learned about sort of the Dremio product, it was a really interesting product that was doing something that I really wasn't seeing done anywhere else, and I still feel that way. And it was a product where there was a lot for me to learn. So those are two: one, being on sort of the cutting edge, and then two, being able to like be in a space where there's sort of like a free field of knowledge to attain were both really appealing. And it certainly lived up to that expectation. Like it's been, a, I feel like I've gotten to grow a lot in a lot of different ways, and actually have to have and being on the cutting edge of sort of what's going on now in the data lakehouse space. I've definitely feel like I've been able to have impact, or at least have some sort of uh, influence over sort of the direction that things have gone the last few
Mm-hmm.
years. Small, but an impact.
Exactly. I think that's what makes people most happy at their jobs is when they are able to make an impact, even if it is small, just, having that importance and seeing the
Yeah,
changes in the company.
yeah, it's like super cool to be part of conversations over like not just sort of like, hey, do you want to use X product, but like what direction is the architecture of a whole industry going to go in? And that's been very exciting and very eye opening, and something I could be really easily passionate about. And when I believe in a product, I believe in a technology, and I'm passionate. Like this goes for anyone. Sky's the limit.
Hmm. Yeah. So, in your role as a developer advocate, what kind of like meetings are you able to go to and like listen in on?
That's what I love about the role. You're in all of it. Because like, I mean, a little bit about my sort of my story arc during my 2.5 years so far at Dremio is that sort of like when I first started, the particular team that I was on was originally called the Tech Evangelism team. It's changed since, but it was basically me and one other developer advocate, and under the with a supervisor under the product team. And the three of us, essentially, our mandate was, for the most part, advocacy of open source. So it wasn't even necessarily talking about Dremio the product, but talking about many of the open source projects that that basically Dremio has utilized, like Apache Arrow, which Dremio utilizes from top to bottom to really achieve really fast data processing. Apache Iceberg, which Dremio supports as a first-class citizen when you're doing asset transactions, as well as a key component to its reflections feature. And not necessarily saying, "Oh, look, Dremio uses these things," but more so saying, "Hey, these are really important things that do really amazing things to your data platform, and is something that you should be considering as part of your data platform, because whether you're using Dremio or some other engine that uses Arrow, it's going to give you speed performance. When you're using Apache Iceberg as a table format to organize your data into tables on your data lake, it's going to provide you with several different features that are unique, like partition evolution, but also provides you a format that is very community oriented, very transparent, so that way you don't have any surprises around the corner of, hey, look, there's this huge breaking format change or something like that. You know that your any changes are going to be well telegraphed ahead of time, and everything is very open, in a very open conversation. So sort of extolling these virtues of openness has been something I can really pour my heart into, because I'm definitely someone who believes in openness. Even before I was in technology, a lot of what I talked about, a lot of what I preach was all about sort of openness and flexibility and flexible institutions and things like that. So um, it really lends into sort of just my natural inclinations.
I want to go back to your background story, and we can talk more about these fun bits, right?
Yeah.
Hey, nerd, are you looking for a career in data? I would absolutely love to help you out. I just launched a data career strategy program that helps folks break into data without breaking anything. I provided a link in the show notes if you want to learn more information about it. Now, back to the fun bits. So specifically, I want to get into you said that you owned a hobby store?
Yes. Okay. So
Okay.
here's a story on that one. This happens when I'm in college. So I'm like 20 at the time. So what happens is I was originally like a residential advisor at the campus, but there was a conflict because I was also the first business I ever really started was a concert promotions business. So what happens when I first joined college, I wanted to put together like huge concerts, but I'm just like some guy who wanted to do it. Like, who's gonna let me do that? So the first step I did is join the local college radio station. I worked my way up to the promotions director, and then I became the promotions director and leveraged that to build relationships with the local concert venues to be able to use them to promote events. And then eventually I was able to bring all my favorite bands to campus. So that was always a good time. I got to make money seeing my favorite bands. So I was doing that, but doing events at the local bars didn't necessarily sit well as someone being a residential advisor. So that eventually gets to a point where I end up having to resign as a residential advisor. So at this point, I have to move off campus, and so I have money for housing. My buddy, he just got out of a really bad relationship, and so he kind of had a chip on his shoulder. So we both had something we wanted to prove. So we're talking about where it's going to go, what's next in our lives, and I'm telling him, it's like back in Connecticut where I grew up, there was these like LAN gaming centers where people would go play Counter Strike all day and all this stuff, and it's like, we don't have anything like that here in Bowling Green, because I went to Bowling Green State University in Ohio. So what happens is we decide that, why don't we build something like that? So he's like, if you write up a business plan, we'll do it. So I wrote up a business plan, and he's like, okay, let's do it. So we pulled together, like, I think it was like $10,000 of capital between the little cash that we had. Like, literally my cash for housing went to the business. So I literally lived in the store. And then a few credit cards, and we got a location, we started the store. But like, I was really, really into marketing at the time, reading a lot of marketing books, a lot of marketing. And so basically, I had a really defined target market. And the concept was, there's the anime crowd, there's the hobby gaming crowd, there's the video game crowd. But what if we put them all under one bigger cultural banner of the gamer? Like, this is gamer culture. So we created a store called the Gamers Lounge. And the idea is like, so instead of it being like a store where you go buy stuff, you can buy stuff, but it's really more of a hangout, like kind of like a bar without drinks for gaming. And so the idea was like, hey, so from a marketing standpoint, hey, this is a new category. There's nothing like that. So we're the first. We've defined this sort of community, the gamer. And I would go to like the anime club, the gaming club, go to all these clubs and build these relationships. So when we first opened, we had a line around the corner, and it went really well. So we basically made back our capital in like a couple months. But as a couple of college kids, what you don't realize is that businesses isn't always good. So we didn't put aside the cash that you need for a rainy day. We reinvested it and had like 2 locations, and went a little nuts. And then towards the end of the semester, where kids have already kind of spent all their money from the beginning of the semester, we didn't really plan for that. So we ended up closing one of the stores, I decided at that point I'm kind of near graduation, so I went out. So I kind of sell my bit. My other two partners in that adventure, they actually still own a store today that's doing really well. Not the same store, but that store ended up getting sold to someone else. I think that event eventually closed. They started another store, I think, which is called the Pop Shop in Ohio, which is now like huge. And they're doing all sorts of really, really cool stuff. And then he also my other business partner had a brief foray in replicating old NES games, like actually replicating the boxes and the cartridges. Something called like Time Walk or something like that. So yeah, that was that whole venture. But they're like basically running the store. I had to teach people how to play card games like Magic the Gathering, uh, Legend of the I forget it was like the Legend of the Ten Rings or something like that. There was a bunch of different card games at the time, and I was like teaching people to play all of them, helping people get started on like MMOs. So it was a lot. It was a lot of fun. So that got me. One, I learned a lot about running a business. Two, I learned a lot about um, uh, basically marketing because we had to promote the business, trying to find different ways to promote the business. Also, just appreciating like a lot of the financial constraints of a business, which has always made me to be like always very budget conscious at any company I've been to, which I think has always served me well. And Yeah, also just learn how to do things on a shoestring budget, like learn really to take like a few bucks and make them go a long way.
Yeah.
So it was a good experience.
That's awesome. So you're still in school and you're just building this company. Question for you. You said that you mentioned that you put together a business proposal for it. Like, how did you learn how to put together a business proposal?
I just looked up template and just
Okay.
filled out the template. So I was just like template for a business plan on Google's and just started like editing it to the best of my ability. I'm sure
Right.
a lot of my projections and guesses were not very accurate, but I tried.
Yeah.
And then yeah, no, definitely like that first semester we were in the business. Basically, the way it would work is that all my classes were in the morning, so I'd get up at like 8 in the morning, do like 12 credit hours before noon, and then noon to midnight the store would be open, and then that was like my life 7 days a week. um, so yeah, that wasn't it was again, it was a brief period of time. It was like a 7 month window where my involvement was in there, but it was quite an experience. And then
Yeah.
during that was my 21st birthday, where we actually threw this big concert with one of my favorite local bands. So it was like everyone from the store, everyone I knew from college, and the radio station. It was a really, you couldn't ask for a better 21st birthday.
Oh, how
um
fun.
yeah, no, it's been a good life. Like I always say, like like I always say that the store up to this point, if I were to like not make it through the day, my story's a good story. I'm happy with the story I've had, but I'm
Mhm.
always glad to continue making the story more fun.
Absolutely. And it sounds like, again, it wraps back around to where you are today with your developer advocacy stuff because you learned about finance and marketing. Another thing that you went into that I wanted to kind of deep dive into is you mentioned being creative with constraints.
Yes. Basically that's been sort of the story of my life. Like I definitely grew up with a lot of constraints growing up. My mother did my mother, bless her, she did amazing things, moved mountains. But yeah, so basically, and I think I find having lived with such constraints to be very valuable, because I mean even as a little kid, when you only have like two action figures, so I have like one GI Joe and one Ninja Turtle and that's it, I got to figure out how to make that work. So it forces you to be creative versus if I had the full set and I could just be like, okay, I'm just immersed in Ninja Turtles. I got to create my own thing. So I've always had to kind of make do and find ways to make magic out of minimum. So I think part of sort of like the way my childhood played out, and a lot of the constraints. And then I've always gravitated to situations where I like to see how far I can push the constraints that I have. And then I was in a similar situation running like the concert promotions business. Like there was no capital. It was just basically hoping that if I can get the band to commit, I can get the venue to commit, and if I put up enough flyers, that it'll work out. Sometimes it
Mhm.
didn't. Sometimes I walk away losing money. But it was just believing that I could do it. And then basically after those first few bits, after those first few sort of experiments of sort of putting myself out there and taking those risks, I definitely bought into that idea that if I just decide to do something, I can do it. And it's just been sort of this, even like in 20, when I decided to switch back into tech, it was literally, I stopped a career that I was, where I was building a reputation in the financial industry for 10 years, literally just stopped it overnight, decided I'm going to make the switch into tech, and just said, okay, well, that's what I do. And just basically didn't look back, just studied, created content, and just kept focusing on. And unfortunately, like part of that was not fortunately, but in the context, a couple of those years I had to kind of remain in isolation, so basically allowed me to kind of really focus on what I was doing. So that certainly was time. The timing was what it was. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. In all of those times that you're kind of like switching those gears, there's got to be like a lot of new things that you need to learn, right?
yes and no, and that's one of the things I think having been exposed to as many things I have has been really beneficial. Is like you start noticing that the same ideas sort of start appearing in most things, like a lot of the concepts, like I think as far as I think about how I break down certain like products and finance, when I think about like how a lot of a lot of the marketing concepts, a lot of the how do I design a bond, and how do I create a financial product for the right financial customer, are the same, similar to the concepts I'm thinking when I'm thinking, okay, why is this product good for a technological buyer, and sort of thinking through, of course, ideas like, hey, what is the value, what is the pain, what are you trying to solve for, but also things like just thinking through sort of like ideas of openness, and basically when there's more people interacting with something, that thing is oftentimes more robust. And which is
Mm-hmm.
why while gravitating towards the concept of like markets when I was working in finance, and seeing how like when you have a huge market of lots of people participating and kind of all voicing their opinion through their transactions, you can discover prices in the same way you have like a big market of developers contributing to open source that allows you to discover tool sets and formats of those tools that you otherwise wouldn't have discovered. And sort of that just sort of like this sort of open open public square type venues just always really appealed to me.
Yeah. So instead of looking at these new adventures as being brand new, you kind of look back at what tools do I already have in my tool belt that I can leverage to make learning this semi new stuff not seem so new and difficult.
Exactly. It's like, I mean, and unfortunately, like, as far as on the technology side, like I did have like a lot of like I did do a lot of that sort of with RPG Maker, and I did learn C++ a little bit when I was younger and whatnot. So that made it all a lot easier. Like I was already familiar with like object oriented programming and functional programming and all that stuff. So it was just more of just making it my day to day versus just something I passively had interest in. So I was able to make that leap. But I mean, the finance thing was completely like blindside. Like I had no intention or interest in finance before I got into it. So after succeeding in that and being able to develop a reputation and being well respected among the community that I was in for training, I felt comfortable with the idea that I could kind of go to any space, given, and that I could trust myself to learn what I need to learn and immerse myself to the extent to assimilate into any space.
When you're looking at how to leverage these different tools that you already have to learn those new things, what are your kind of like go-to resources to make you more successful in learning that?
Um, my key strategy is content creation actually. So it's not so much like I'll learn. My thing is keeping myself learning. And by creating content, I motivate myself to keep learning. So what I'll do is if I'm reading a book, so when I was doing like economics and finance, if I was reading a book, I would actually literally do a video where I would teach what I learned in that chapter and publish it on YouTube. Now that I'm learning, like, well, not when I was learning code, so now I'm past that. But when I was learning code, like I would make videos of me doing Python, Go, Rust, JavaScript. So now there's like thousands of videos of me doing developer content on YouTube. But basically knowing that I had a piece of content that I'd have at the other side of learning something incentivized me to learn, because it was also an investment in my brand. So I think to me that was sort of the key strategy, where basically learning, basically leveraging your learning as a springboard
Mhm.
was really useful. And actually I got a lot of, back when I was doing more web development and development in general, a lot of my freelance work was through doing those videos. Like I'd make a video on like, hey, look, there's Gatsby and there's this weird quirk in Gatsby 4, or if you're migrating from Gatsby 3 to 4, and then someone would be like, yeah, okay, I was looking at your video to help me do it, but can I just pay you to do it? And then they'd hire me and I just go write the code to do their thing, or they have something with Next.js and I would do that. Nowadays I don't do freelance anymore, but um, but I still get questions. Like I'll put out content and people are like, okay, well, like, okay, I wrote this Spark script. Can you tell me where I made a mistake? And then, we'll sit there and have a quick chat, and I'll take a look at their Spark script and say, okay, here's this is an excellent space in your config here, or something like that. And we'll get it working. Particularly around Iceberg. I think Iceberg is probably like the topic, particularly in data space, that people have come to know me as being knowledgeable on.
What was your favorite coding language to teach on your tutorials?
I mean, I love JavaScript personally. Like, here's the way I would put it. Like, I like JavaScript because writing JavaScript to me feels like I'm running through a field. Like, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and there's nothing stopping me. Like, if I want to like have a function that returns a class definition, that returns, I can do wacky stuff that makes no sense. So it's fun. But I like Rust for its rigor, because in Rust, like, yes, it's a real pain, and you're going to get like compile errors like every 5 seconds, because it's really rigid typing. But the error messages are so good because of it. Like, the errors tell you exactly what you need to fix because the coding is so rigid.
Mhm.
So at least there, like, I know, like, when I make a mistake, I know what mistake I made. Well, like in JavaScript, I know what mistake I made, but it's because I've learned to read between the lines from several years of making similar mistakes, that I know what an error that says something completely different means.
Mhm.
Well, Rust actually tells you, like, this is where you screwed up. I think so that those two extremes I really like. Um, I I have a love hate relationship with Python. Like, I feel totally comfortable with Python. It's just like the really weird quirks, like one, like true and false having to be capitalized. That really drives me nuts. Also, like, so many different options, like for virtual environments. So I was like,
Mhm.
while like if I'm working in somewhere like Node, there's options, but really everyone knows how to use like everything revolves around a package.json file. So well, like, it might be a requirements.txt, there might be a pip file, there might be like, there's so many different ways to kind of list out or isolate your dependencies in Python. It's better than it was, but like, those were definitely my little pet peeves. Ruby Ruby's okay. I have no problems with Ruby. I just don't really need it as often. Um, let's see here. Go's fun. I haven't really touched Go recently, but I'd like to get back more into Go. This is I'm trying to spend more time with Rust, because there's just a lot of really interesting things to me. There's just a lot of things that are really interesting to me about Rust. Um, and then also just like spending more time with Java, just because like so many data projects are in Java.
Mhm.
Having that sort of like deeper, like, I feel like Java and Scala, just like really kind of understanding like their ecosystem and the design choices in the language is always really interesting. Like, as you can tell, like, I'm a bit of a, like, I find different programming languages very interesting. Like, I do have a lot of videos where I just literally just talk about like design choices in different languages, and sort of like, well, it was interesting they made this choice in this language and this choice in that language. Um, but yeah, I would say like JavaScript is where I have the most fun, but what Russ is doing is sort of I'm conceptually the biggest fan of.
Mhm. You said that you have a love-hate relationship for Python. Would you say that's your least favorite language, or do you have
No,
a least favorite language?
no, Python is definitely up there with some of my favorite languages. It's just like, whenever I'm switching between Python and JavaScript, like, you know, it's like, I don't know, like, it's just like those little quirks. But no, no, if I were to say like language I like the least, or like I enjoy writing the least, I mean, it would probably have to be any list-based language, whether it's Lisp, Clojure, uh, R, where it's just like the syntax is completely different than what I'm used to, or the way
Mm,
my brain typically thinks. And it's not even like I dislike them; it's just like I'm not as comfortable. But that's just because I don't spend as much time with them. Although there's some functional language that I have really enjoyed. Like, I definitely really enjoyed OCaml. Um, again, more conceptually than in practice. Like, I wouldn't say like I've spent a lot of time where I build big things with OCaml, but it's like, okay, I like some of the ideas here. I would like some of these syntactical things to be exist in the languages I do use more often. And
Hmm.
I'm starting to see that where basically every feature's in every language nowadays.
Yeah.
There's a few things that JavaScript's missing. Like I want pattern matching. I want, uh, yeah, I really want pattern matching in JavaScript so bad. But yeah, no, but yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Although even though nowadays most of my time I'm thinking about less about like languages and thinking more about metadata structures and thinking about like, okay,
Okay.
how do I how do you make systems work faster indirectly? Like I always think
Okay.
about metadata through analogy of like I go to a kitchen and there's a bunch of forks and knives and tools and all sorts of stuff, and that's my data. I could go look for a
Hmm.
fork, but I might have to go through every cabinet to look for that fork. But if I had a clipboard on the side that says, okay, hey, in drawer B there's the fork, I could go look at that first and I actually end up finding the fork faster. And to
Yeah.
me, like, that's so once that click, like, that's the role of metadata. Like metadata is like this external thing that just makes it easier to find the thing. um it makes you really appreciate like the beauty of different metadata designs.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of the coding languages that you just mentioned, I've never even heard of before. And I'm just thinking, like, do you not know any coding languages? I'm sure there's a billion out there. But
I mean, there's a bunch of new ones I haven't had a chance to try out yet. Like they just released something called Gleam. I haven't done anything on the Erlang VM, so I haven't done Erlang, I haven't done Elixir, I haven't done Gleam, um, I haven't done Groovy. Like I'm familiar, I know it exists, I just haven't touched it. Those are the ones off the top of my head. Oh, and Zig, I haven't touched Zig.
do you think knowing all of these different languages is helpful in your career, or you just like learning all the things?
I just like learning all the things. Like that's just always been me. Like even when I was like in every walk of life I've done, like I just have this like I need to know all the categories. Um, but I don't think learning as many as I have is necessarily like is going to be like universally useful. Like me is useful because I like to have this sort of comfort of knowing the surface space of where I am. But where I do find value in learning multiple things is, for example, like when I was learning like front end frameworks, most people, I spend a lot of time with React, but I learned like, React, Vue, Svelte, Solid, etc. Quick, I haven't played too much with. But playing with like those frameworks, like you start seeing that certain ideas are just the same. So like after learning like React and Vue, every other one was a marginal learning curve because like the ideas are the same. Same with like programming language. Like a function is always a function. A class is always a class. These things are always the same. There's little nuances from language to language, but once you kind of get the concept, like if you give me an hour, I'll be able to do the same thing in another language. It may take me a little longer to do it because I don't know the right libraries or what are the built-in libraries and things like that right off the top of my head yet, but I know like the tools are there. Like the same tools are generally there in every language. So it's just
Hmm.
thinking, okay, how did I do it in JavaScript? How did I do it in Python? What would I reach for? Let me go find what the equivalent is there. So because usually when you learn one thing, everything seems like it's just sort of magically part of that. Once
Uh-huh.
you learn two, you realize 90% of it is just the way things work, and there's like a 10% that is unique to that thing. And
Hmm.
then so then it becomes a much easier because you're not you that 90% becomes portable from thing to thing. And
Yeah.
same thing with like a lot of like thinking about how different databases work and whatnot. I know once I know the architecture of just generally how data platforms are architected and the different components, catalogs, table format, storage layer, and all these things. Like conceptually, it's like okay, when I go from data platform to data platform, I'm just thinking, okay, what is basically I'm just asking those same questions like where's the data being stored, how are we tracking the tables, how are we cataloging those tables, and how are we processing those queries. And even if I don't know the exact nuances, I can wrap my head around things conceptually.
Main takeaway I'm gleaming from this is that if you enjoy learning all of the things, then developer advocacy is the way to go.
Yes, because it's literally a job where you basically like learning is like having an insatiable appetite to learn is an asset.
Mhm.
Um, so it's yeah, no, it's like, as you can and basically yeah. So like kind of like the little cartoon picture there with the open brain there. That's totally relatable.
Yes.
So yeah, yes, no, I would definitely say like if you love to learn, not just love to learn, you have to love to educate, because like part of developer advocacy is then taking all that stuff you take in and then putting it out in a way that is easy to consume. But if that's if that is sort of like your sweet spot, and then yeah, developer advocacy. And the thing is that it's a really difficult role to find, because it's not just you have to be technical, you have to have some level of charisma. I wouldn't say I'm like the most charismatic person in the world, but I have, I guess, some charm. And then um, and then you have to be able to take the technicals part and put it in a way that not just other technical peers can understand. Because, like, yes, a lot of my audience are like data engineers and data analysts, and I explain so some of the stuff they'll be familiar with. But there's also going to be people who are like new to the space, and there's also going to be like business leaders who may not be as technical, who also need to understand these things and need to be able to kind of wrap their mind around it. And if I can take the deeper nuances of it and make those attainable, then I can make their conviction in adopting new architectures and new technologies much better. Because a lot of times they're like, okay, you told me what the value is, but I'm taking your faith that that's there,
Mm-hmm.
because they may not know the nuances. But if I can make those nuances almost as easy as understanding just the basic value propositions, then you can build the conviction to really transform how people look towards the future.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, do you have any final words of encouragement or recommendations for the listeners out there?
Regardless of what you're doing, you should always just like love to learn new things. But as far as like things to do, just like one, learn, one, to be passionate. Like at the end of the day, like if you're passionate and you care about what you're doing, you'll always be of value and you'll always be wanted. Yeah, so, but the point is just always just love whatever you're doing. When whatever you're doing, you a day will never be boring, and then you'll always find new opportunities, because who doesn't want people with passion on their team? So you can always learn more, but the passion, you tap into that, you'll always be successful.
Absolutely. That's a great takeaway. Well, Alex, if anybody does have any questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
You guys can follow me on LinkedIn and on Twitter at AM Data Lakehouse. I also highly recommend subscribing to my blog. So you can either do that by subscribing to my LinkedIn newsletter or on Substack at amdatalakehouse.substack.com. Oftentimes writing about the data lakehouse. So if you wanted to learn more about what is a data lakehouse, what is Dremio, what is Apache Iceberg, what is all these things, definitely go subscribe to the blog and check out my blogs over there at dremio.com. And last, next month, we'll not, well, maybe a little bit more than next month, in May, Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide, will be released as the O'Reilly book that me and some of the others at Dremio spent the last year writing. So it's going to be out. It's going to be a physical book with my name on it. That's so cool. So I encourage you guys to read it. You know, pick up a copy if it's just to make me smile. And yeah, but yeah, follow me on LinkedIn and read the blog. Follow me on Twitter, and definitely keep in touch. And thank you so much for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so very much, Alex, for coming on the show with us.
No problem. Anytime. I just love to talk.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. And as always, folks, happy learning.